farmhouse for a modest sum, and during the first few days of our stay, Sonia had been laid low by a baffling affliction. It seemed to be caused by the ectoplasm that had been splashed onto her skin. She lay for days, rambling in a feverish state about liches and wraiths, and the moaning of the undead. I tended her wounds and sponged the sweat from her skin as best I could, but it was more than 2 weeks before she had started to regain some of her strength and vitality. Her skin was pale, and her beautiful auburn hair was lank and dull, and she was very weak. I didn't mind being her nursemaid. She would have done it for me. For reasons I cannot explain, when she was well again, I refrained from mentioning her nightmares about the tomb we had tried to raid. We hadn't talked about going back for nearly a month, and I didn't want to broach the subject until Sonia had recovered. But I needed to go back. Like hooks in my skin, something was drawing me, and I had resisted only by sheer strength of will, and I suspected that Sonia's fever dreams were something similar. But even though we were friends, who would fight and die for each other, in this I wasn't sure Sonia would have done the same. Now the decision was made. We were both going back, and we might both lose our lives in this endeavor. Rising well before dawn, while it was still cool, we made our preparations later. When the sun was high, the relentless heat would draw the energy from our bodies like the juice being sucked from an orange, and we needed to make an early start. Sonia saddled the horses while I double-checked our supplies, packing herbs and potions and specially enchanted scrolls into dry leather packs, which I then carefully laid across the back of the pack horse. I left some coins on the barrel by the front door of the farmhouse for the landlord. It was time to go. The horses were unsettled as we led them through the stable gate and mounted up. They seemed to take on our mood. I looked back briefly at the small farmhouse as we rode down the road to another one of the dangerous ventures. Sometimes I thought I had a death wish. For 3 days we traveled, almost pushing the horses to exhaustion. We arrived at the grateful pass stables outside Skingrad, and I sought out the stable hand. He was stacking bales of hay in the shed at the back of the owner's house, and I pressed a few coins into his hand, and I gave instructions for the care of our mounts. I'll be back for those horses, I told the youth. Don't let any orcs near them, or I'll feed you to a brown bear, understand me? I whispered in his ear, making my intentions clear. He was speechless. I want to see David Sturley before we go on, I said to Sonia. We need some wine, and David has the best vintages. Besides, sometimes he has something special that he keeps for his friends. The winery was just up the road, and as we walked among the grapevines, I spotted David coming toward us. He invited us to his house, and from his cellar, we chose 4 bottles of a good blood red vintage, and as I offered him a gold coin to pay for it, he refused to take it. It's been a long time, Rose, he said. It's good to see you. He glanced towards Sonia, and I introduced them, hoping they would become friends as I was with both of them. We drank good wine and sampled vintage cheese, and soon the subject of our trip arose. When I spoke of the ancient ruins to the north, David went still, but then he spoke in a low voice. We should stay away from over there, he said. Over the last few months, at least 3 groups of hunters have disappeared in the area. Only one man has returned, and he was raving about the undead and other frightening things. David opened a cupboard next to him, took out a small black bottle, and handed it to me. It was squat and rounded with an oily sheen, and the instant I touched it, a rush of warmth infused my body. And I heard a whispering and pleading voice, but I was unable to make out the words. I couldn't put it down, and I didn't want to give it back. What is this? I asked David. He shook his head. I don't know. All I do know is that it was in the possession of a man who came back from the north. I held the black bottle up to the lamplight, and could see what appeared to be liquid swirling like a living thing inside it. I had no clue what it might be. May I take it? I asked. David asked David. He agreed reluctantly after making me promise to be careful. We thanked him for his hospitality and returned to the stables. Sonia and I sorted through our equipment and decided to leave everything non-essential in the care of the stable hand, who seemed to be taking my threat seriously. Good. That meant our things would be here when we returned. We meticulously inspected our weapons for nicks and scratches, and I told the stable boy to get lost so we could change into our armor. We both preferred to wear light leather because it was easier to move quickly and quietly if the situation required it. We waited until evening had set in and started on our last leg of our journey. After a remarkably uneventful 12-hour trek through the forest and 2 bottles of wine later, we found the path leading to the ruins. It had become overgrown with bushes. We nearly missed it. Here goes, I said to Sonia as we started up the hill. We found the bleaching bones of the werewolves scattered by the scavengers, except they looked more human without their flesh and fur covering. We wait until dark, I said. The shadows will hide us. Sonia nodded. The sun had long since set as we approached the tomb. There was a large wooden wedge jammed underneath the door, and the debris had been swept away. I had a sinking feeling in my chest. It seemed someone or something had pressed through here very recently. We were able to raise the door without much effort, and as we stepped inside, the air grew chill and carried the scent of death. Faint sounds echoed from the vastness of the first chamber down the familiar stairs. I put a finger to my lips and signaled to Sonia to go forward down the stairs while I waited by the doorway. She nodded and crouched as she drew her sword, crab, walking down the stairs into the intersection at the end, where there was a balcony with gaps that she could see through. She looked back and pointed downward, shaking her head. Suddenly, the stairway was shrouded in darkness, and the door behind me slammed shut. I could hear moaning and shuffling sounds coming from Sonia's direction, and I looked on in horror as a giant dread zombie grabbed Sonia by the hair and swung her around to face it. I could see even the dimness, noxious fluids oozing from the empty body cavity, and maggots squirmed in the ruins of its face. Its mouth moved as if it was going to speak, and then the floor opened up beneath me. Okay. So, this is a very long story. And I was gonna do about 27 minutes. We were gonna be done. It's now 35, and I still have many more to read. So hooray! All right, Ghouls and Ghosts 3 by the same person, Necromancy and Sonia. The pain was agonizing and relentless screaming along Sonia's spine, and when she tried to open her eyes, they seemed to be glued shut, and she supposed it was her own blood and hoped it wasn't something worse. As she tried to move her head, a terrible spinning sensation rocked her, and she retched, sending stabbing needles of pain throughout the whole of her body. Her hands were tied, but the bindings moved a little as she pushed against them. A breath of air stirred Sonia's hair, and she jumped. "Don't try to move, the mistress will hear." The voice was soft and sibilant, like a snake or lizard, and so quiet it was difficult to make out the words. Okay, I'm gonna put a little pin here for a second. Okay, so here's how it's gonna work. So since this is gonna be a really long segment of the recording, here's what I'm going to do though. I don't care how long this part is nearly as much. If this makes it 12 or 14 videos, that's completely fine. Because you can skip it if you don't want to hear the book or something like that. And I apologize for being so monotone towards this. I would be so interested in it kind of thing. But these books are very long, and we haven't even gone to the one that's 36 pages yet. These are about less than 20 pages each. kind of thing. I think like 2 of them are 12, one of them's like 16, and one of them's like I think 14 or something like that. So altogether, this is like 50 pages worth of story, kind of thing, or more than 50 pages. And like it's just 4 books. And I still have to go through this one right here, The King's Axeman. That's like 30 pages. It's like a little more than 30 pages. So it's like, oh my word, like I'm sorry if I'm sounding so monotone towards this stuff. It's that I just want to get it done quickly, and I don't want to do anything goofy kind of thing. I just want it done. So I apologize for that. Back to the story. Something soft, a cloth perhaps, rubbed gently at Sonia's face and cleared some of the mess away. Carefully, she opened her eyes, just slits at first. Though the room was dimly lit with a reddish glow, kneeling next to her was a young Argonian female, trembling, it seemed with fear, her eyes wide and glistening. I am Smoke Eyes. Wait, I will unbind your hands, the Argonian hissed. When her hands were free, Sonia managed to get into a sitting position. She could see that the chamber wasn't overly large, and there were aged marble pillars from floor to ceiling at each corner. But it was the center of the room that caught her attention. A dark-robed figure was facing away, unmoving and radiating a miasma of malevolence. It stood before an altar, but the contents were obscured from sight. Slumped on the floor in the corner opposite was the dread zombie that was her captor. Sonic Eyes beckoned for Sonia to follow her, and they crawled on all fours, skirting round the robed figure, using boxes and chests for cover, until they reached the open doorway, and then slipped through it. At the last second, Sonia glanced back and saw the face that would haunt her for many years to come. It was also reptilian, but not an Argonian, altered by hideous magics. It was deformed and diseased. Perhaps it was female. It was difficult to tell, and as she backed away, the face lifted, the eyes boring right into hers, and it smiled with a cruel amusement. Crawling along a short corridor, they came across a small alcove and ducked inside. Sonia grabbed Smoke Eyes by the arm. Wait, I have a friend, a woman. Have you seen her? She said her name is Ashen Rose. Yes, I have seen her. She is safe for now, answered the Argonian, her scales flushing red. Where is she? Take me to her, Sonia demanded. Later. You will find her later. She would say no more, not even about the figure at the altar, except for one thing. Your friend has something my mistress wants. Do you know what it is? Sonia had no idea what she was talking about, and could not get the Argonian to say any more. It seemed an eternity later that they reached a small darkened room where they could rest. Briefly after hiding from the undead, and worse, phantoms, and even giant rats and moving skeletons. Strangely, none had come close, and it appeared they hadn't been detected. Sonia's weapons had been taken from her, even the dagger she kept in her boot. Smoke Eyes seemed content to remain in hiding, but Sonia couldn't just stay there and do nothing. She had to find a way out of this unholy mess. I'll remain for a while, Smoke Eyes said. I am weak. Perhaps we will meet again. As Sonia started to leave the room, the Argonian clutched her sleeve. Be careful of traps, she giggled. The passages were laid out like some kind of labyrinth, and Sonia quickly became disoriented. The air was oppressive with traces of the poisons she remembered from the last trip here, and she coughed until her throat was raw, and she spat blood. The shrieking and moaning was getting closer, and the rattle and click of moving bones was nearby. The undead were hunting. Sonia seemed to be going in circles, and she needed a way to mark where she had already been, otherwise she would wander here until her death or undeath. Neither option appealed. Probably were appealing? I don't know. The floor was littered with bits of stone and other debris, and she found a shard of marble with a razor edge and gritted her teeth as she made a shallow cut in the base of her thumb and squeezed a few drops of blood so they fell to the floor to show where she had already passed. Continuing on, she reached a balcony similar to the entrance of this accursed place, and she could hear a distant voice. She knelt down to look through the gap and saw a figure in the room below. It was Ashen Rose, pacing back and forth from one side of the huge room to the other, staying on the perimeter, pushing and pulling at the metal gates that were set into archways at each end, and both appeared to be locked. In the center, there was a huge metal vent built into the floor, and tendrils of greenish mist floated upwards from it. The switches to open the gates must be nearby, but first she had to find the way down. Following the narrow corridor around a corner, Sonia stepped forward, and a massive blade fell from the ceiling, and she only just managed to jump away as another fell behind her. If you don't hurt yourself, your body is young and healthy, and I can make use of it. You're mine, though. I don't care about it. The voice sliced into Sonia's brain like a razor blade. It sounded like Smoke Eyes, and yet not. She knew who it was. Games had begun. A reckoning was coming. Alright, last book. Alright, the fourth book by the same person, Necromancy and Me. I fell for several long seconds in pitch blackness onto hard, cold stone. I was winded, but mostly unhurt, except for a few scrapes and bruises. In the darkness, it was difficult to gauge the dimensions of the space I'd fallen into, and there were odd sounds, like a quill scratching parchment, or fingernails on dry, scaly skin. The air was chill and damp. I made a small hand gesture, and a pale greenish light surrounded me. If I was going to die, I wanted to see it coming face first. The pale glow didn't reach to the walls, so I tentatively took a few steps forward, glancing down in case of a misstep, and another long fall that I might not survive. My leather pack was gone somewhere in the dark, but I still had my twin crescent daggers sheathed in boots, custom made to fit them. Reaching into the pocket of my cloak, I breathed a sigh of relief. It was still there and unbroken. The black bottle, its contents seething and agitated. The light spell began to fade, and the instant before the darkness returned, a face appeared directly in front of mine. High-pitched giggling and whispering sounds filled the room. The cold and repulsive caress of ghostly fingers stroked my face and neck, and I stumbled backwards. I managed to regain my balance easily, while at the same time searching my mind for a spell to repulse the dead that were surely surrounding me. Magic so predictable. I wouldn't bother myself